As more and more begin to know, the status quo has got to go. They're bound to say yes to a man named Dr. No, a man who makes the establishment panic. Grassroots are growing way too wild, too organic.
President Biden ordered a ton of airstrikes in Iraq and Syria. They said that they hit 85 targets in both countries. And when U.S. Central Command made the announcement of the airstrikes, they said that they targeted the Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and affiliated militias. So that's what we were worried about, them actually targeting Iranians. As things stand now, there's no sign that any Iranians were killed. It was mostly the Iraqi militia members, at least in Iraq. And then in Syria, it's not clear exactly who was killed. But Kyle Anzalone wrote this stuff up for us over the weekend. So I'll just read a little bit from his story. It says a massive U.S. bombing campaign struck scores of targets in Iraq and Syria with over 100 bombs, leaving about 40 people dead, including civilians. And so in Iraq, the Iraqi government said that 16 Iraqis, including some civilians, were killed. Although the following day, the PMF, which is the Popular Mobilization Forces, they're the militias that are actually part of the Iraqi security forces. They said that 16 of their members were killed. And then the Syrian death toll is unconfirmed. The only number we really have is from the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, which they're based in the UK. They're not really the best source, but they're the only ones putting out a number. They say 23 were killed in Syria. The Syrian Defense Ministry said that members of their military, the Syrian military, were killed, as well as some civilians, but they didn't put out a number. So far, I've not seen Iran say that any of their guys were killed. So, we'll see how this escalates. And this was mostly in eastern Syria and western Iraq that these strikes were launched. Now, to get into the next story, the top story at antiwar.com today, the U.S. seems to be threatening that they're not done. The U.S. refuses to rule out strikes inside Iran. So National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan on Sunday refused to rule out direct U.S. airstrikes inside Iran while discussing the widespread bombing the U.S. launched in Iraq and Syria on Friday. And of course, these airstrikes, they're saying, were in response to the drone attack in Jordan on the Syrian border that happened on January 28th and killed 3 U.S. troops. So Sullivan said this while appearing on CNN's State of the Union. He signaled that the bombing campaign is not over, saying that the U.S. is planning more actions. So when asked if the U.S. has ruled out launching attacks on Iranian territory, Sullivan said, quote, "Look, sitting on a national TV program, I'm not going to rule in and rule out any activity anywhere," end quote. So, and it's important, remember, as I've been covering a lot, the U.S. is blaming Iran for the Jordan drone attack, even though they have no evidence. They freely admit that they have no evidence that Iran was directly involved. They say they're responsible because they arm the Shia militias the U.S. believed was behind the drone attack. Iraq and Syria were not the only place that the U.S. bombed over the weekend. The U.S. and the U.K. launched another round of heavy strikes on Yemen. So the U.S. and Britain launched another round of joint missile strikes in Yemen on Saturday night as the situation in the Red Sea continues to escalate and the Houthis still show no sign of backing down. So U.S. Central Command said the strikes were launched against 13 targets in 36 locations in Houthi-controlled Yemen, which is where most Yemenis live. Houthi military spokesman Yahya Sarria said that there was 48 strikes in total in multiple governments or provinces, including in Sana'a, Hodeidah, Taiz, El Baida, Hajjah, and Sadah. So that's a lot of areas where these strikes were hitting. And CENTCOM claimed that the strikes hit multiple underground storage facilities, command and control missile systems, drone storage, and other operation sites. The command said that the bombing was launched by the U.S. and the U.K., and they say it was supported by Australia, Bahrain, Canada, Denmark, the Netherlands, and New Zealand. So Bahrain has been the only Arab country that I've seen lumped into this group of countries that say they're supporting the U.S. in the Red Sea against the Houthis. So this was on Saturday night, late Saturday night, Yemen time. And then early Sunday, a few hours later, CENTCOM said that it launched another strike against a Houthi anti-ship missile. And on Sunday, the command said that it launched 2 more rounds of... So the U.S. bombed... Is my math right here? Yeah, they bombed Yemen 3 times on Sunday. And when we're talking total rounds of airstrikes, so the one that the U.S. and the U.K. launched was pretty significant. I count that as like a round of airstrikes, the same as when the U.S. announces that they just bombed, one Houthi missile or something. So by my count, there's been 18 rounds of airstrikes, U.S. airstrikes. Sometimes the U.K. joined in, but it was mostly unilateral U.S. airstrikes in Yemen. So 18 times since January 12th. So the Senate, they've been negotiating this behemoth foreign military aid bill that also includes spending for the border. They've been trying to get a deal on border policy, migration policy, and they reached a deal, and the Senate Appropriations Committee on Sunday unveiled a massive $118 billion spending bill that includes military aid for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan, as well as spending for President Biden's new war with the Houthis. So they're lumping it all in together. And this bill is a result of months of negotiations between Senate Democrats and Republicans on border policies, and it includes $20 billion in border spending. The rest of it is mostly foreign military aid. So it's not clear if this is going to pass. Some Republicans in the Senate are not happy with the deal, and then there's some kind of progressive Democrats who think that the border agreement, the measures are too restrictive of immigration. And then in the House, the House Speaker, Mike Johnson, has flat out rejected it. He says that it's going to be dead in the House. And because he is a big Israel supporter, Johnson says that there's going to be a vote on the House floor this week for a standalone bill for Israel for $17.6 billion to support the Israeli slaughter that's happening in Gaza. So it looks like they're going to try to push that through. If that passes the House, which it probably will, the question is if it's going to go through the Senate or if the Senate's going to try to get the big thing passed.
And Mike Meharry, in an article that we just published last Friday, said in early 1766, the colonists effectively nullified the Stamp Act, forcing the Parliament to repeal the hated law. There was a combination of resistance and noncompliance by the people. Even some local sheriffs didn't participate in enforcement. We know that there were resolutions at the legislative level, at the legislative assembly level, and even there was a court in Maryland that struck it down as unconstitutional and against the law, and no one was bound to obey it. We saw all kinds of stuff, and that kind of combination of resistance and opposition and noncompliance at various levels really made the law unenforceable. And I think it was more of a political decision by Parliament. They knew that they were in trouble, and if they didn't actually repeal it, they were going to have a big problem on their hands. But as Mike Meharry points out, there was a caveat with that repeal. It was a slap in the face. It was a backhanded repeal, in essence. And he writes that at the same time, Parliament also passed what was known as the Declaratory Act, asserting that it could make laws binding the American colonies, quote, in all cases whatsoever. So at the same time, they're saying, okay, we're gonna get rid of this, but we don't want you guys to think that we are giving up on this idea of internal taxation. We can make laws binding on you no matter what, in every situation whatsoever, in all cases whatsoever. And the act was actually called an Act for the Better Securing the Dependency of His Majesty's Dominions in America upon the Crown and Parliament of Great Britain. John Adams here in his diary of April 26, 1766, probably just weeks after it was passed, he points out that the first resolve is that the King, Lords, and Commons have an undoubted right to make laws for the colonies in all cases whatsoever. I am solicitous to know whether they will lay a tax in consequence of that resolution or what kind of law they will make. So John Adams, for example, especially when he was one of the good guys early on, he saw this and recognized, well, how are they going to use this? It's not just like Benjamin Franklin was saying in the House of Commons, no one is expecting to use it. We know already that it was more of a minority, but John Adams was one who was pointing that out. And we know that less than 15 months later than this, at the instigation of Charles Townshend, they certainly did attempt to carry it into practice. This is the Townshend Acts of 1767. We know the rest from there is often, well, they call it history. The rest is history. He said, if kings, lords, and commons can make laws to bind us in all cases whatsoever, the people here will have no influence, no check, no power, no control, no negative. So you are under total control of an outside entity. And for them, the taxation without representation was a part of that, because if you're going to claim power over us and we can't even have any say in what that power is, that's double bad. And Joseph Warren, Dr. Joseph Warren, he's one of the most important Revolutionary War heroes. We don't talk about him very much, but he worked with the Sons of Liberty quite a bit in Boston. He was very close with Samuel Adams. And here in November of 1772, they passed at the Boston town meeting, they passed a couple of things. One written by Samuel Adams primarily, the rights of the colonists. And then here, Joseph Warren, kind of a precursor to the so-called grievances in the Declaration of Independence, or the list of injuries and usurpations, as Thomas Jefferson put it in that document. Here we are in 1772, a list of infringements and violations of rights. So they're going through all the problems. 1772, we've got some issues happening, especially in Boston at that point, ramping up to the Boston Tea Party and the coercive acts. Things are just getting worse and worse and worse. Parliament wants to assert authority. The people don't go along with the taxes because they're unconstitutional, so Parliament tries another version. The people resist, so Parliament ramps it up, sends a standing army, blockades, over and over and over. It keeps going like that. So we have this early list of infringements and violations of rights drafted by Joseph Warren and passed in November of 1772 in Boston. we cannot help thinking that an enumeration of some of the most open infringements of our rights will by every candid person be judged sufficient to justify whatever measures have already been taken or may be thought proper to be taken in order to obtain a redress of the grievances under which we labor. First, the British Parliament have assumed the powers of legislation for the colonists in all cases whatsoever, without obtaining the consent of the inhabitants, which is ever essentially necessary to the rightful establishment of such a legislature. So they weren't even going so far as to question the idea that a legislature could have unlimited power. They're just saying, if there is going to be unlimited power, we at least got to have a say. But they were recognizing first that this unlimited power was the number one problem. And then everything else was an outgrowth of it. So if you look at things today, if the federal government is supreme in all cases whatsoever, if federal law is always supreme, as people falsely claim it is, rather than being supreme just in pursuance of the delegated powers of the Constitution, there really is not much difference on the ground to what the old revolutionaries really took a stand against and then eventually fought a long, bloody war to free themselves from. So number two, they have exerted that assumed power, in all cases whatsoever, in raising a revenue in the colonies without their consent. So a list of infringements from the Sons of Liberty in Boston, drafted by Joseph Warren, supported by Samuel Adams, John Hancock, and so many others. The number one thing is the Declaratory Act in 1772, and everything else was an outgrowth of that. Richard Henry Lee writes to Samuel Adams later in October of 1773, pointing out this big shift. And I keep talking about how there was a shift in the viewpoints of the people, especially when it comes to sovereignty. And here's how Richard Henry Lee put it to Samuel Adams. Every day gives us new light and new strength. At first, it was a tender point to question the authority of Parliament over us in any case whatsoever. So there was this kind of subservience, I guess. They had all been raised under the notion that, well, yes, they do have this power in certain areas. And so they were kind of cautious about just even questioning that. It was a tender point to question the authority of Parliament over us in any case whatsoever. But by 1773, Richard Henry Lee is noting, well, now we're questioning it in every situation. And that's how he put it. Time and you, Samuel Adams, have proved that their right is equally questionable in all cases whatsoever. And I think that should be kind of a silver lining for us today. So many times when we're talking about one issue or another, some kind of federal or state or local program that's attacking someone's liberty, we all, it's so easy to do some whataboutism. Oh, this person might, sure, okay, they sound good on this, but what about this terrible position they did on that? And rather than saying, well, this is an opportunity to open eyes, as Richard Henry Lee, we are only questioning this power at first, but now we're questioning all of them. It at least is the door is open. And it's really incumbent upon us to keep pressing forward for more.
The thing that bothers me the most, and I know you read these and get disgusted with it, are the statements coming from when you talk to them on the street or have dinner with them or say hello. They seem half decent. Yeah. But then they come up with these militant things. We have to do more. And the other thing that gets to me, not only the congressmen that seem to be nice, but they're really warmongers, are the people who say that we have to do this for national security. And if we don't do this, we need to be tough. I've decided a long time. Sometimes it takes as much courage or more to try to say no to these pressure points, the political pressure. And the one thing I think people don't realize, and the few that we have there do realize, people like Thomas Massey finds out that when he stands alone, sometimes the roof doesn't come crashing down on you because he gains more respect. That's what happened.
World, Blinken said, has not seen such a situation as dangerous as the one we're facing now across the region since at least 73 and arguably even before that, is what Blinken said. McGregor says, in response to Blinken's astute evaluation, President Biden is virtue signaling to Washington's war party that he too is willing to pointlessly bomb targets in the Middle East. And here's the line that really struck me, Dr. Paul. In Washington, to do otherwise is to appear weak. And this is something I wrote about to Ron Paul Institute subscribers last night in my weekly column that I send out exclusively to our subscribers. But there's this whole idea, if you don't bomb immediately when someone says boo, then you're weak, you're projecting weakness. And I found a clip that perfectly encapsulates that mentality inside the Beltway. And let's put on that clip. This is Speaker Mike Johnson, who in 45 seconds says basically that exact thing and everything wrong. It's the audio clip, so you might want to grab your earpiece. Let's listen to Speaker Johnson, 49 seconds about appearing weak.
We need to make absolutely clear to Iran that nothing is off the table. You know, we maintain peace through strength. That was the Reagan doctrine. That's what President Trump continued, and that's what we have to do right now. We should not be appeasing Iran. That's what the Biden administration has been doing for the last 3 years. We are projecting weakness on the world stage, and frankly, Kristen, that is why our adversaries are acting so provocatively. What we need to be doing right now is turning up the heat on Iran. We need to act to decimate the Iran central bank, the assets that they've held there. We need to lean on international banks to seize the assets of Iranian proxies. We need to put big-time pressure, maximum pressure on their oil exports. There's a lot that we could do to Iran to send a message instead of this appeasement.
So much for his credibility as a constitutionalist.
Yeah. I mean, he's declaring war on Iran. But the thing that really gets me is this notion, well, Biden is projecting weakness. We need peace through strength. The thing is, it makes America look weak when you do bomb, like we've bombed Yemen, little Yemen. We bombed them 10 times now. The Houthis, far from being discouraged, they're actually even more encouraged. So actually, it doesn't project toughness to bomb if the bombing has no deterrent value. And that's the whole point of what Doug's writing about here.
I see that Johnson, I think it was Johnson that mentioned Reagan as an example of an ally. Yeah. And of course, I've used Reagan as an ally when he noticed easily a big mistake that he admitted was a big mistake. And he at one time said, if I had not sent those troops over there, they all would be alive today. Something like that. It was so dramatic. So yes, he was being influenced, by the wrong people and overwhelmed. They went ahead and put him in. But then he finally just removed the troops from Lebanon after 242 of them were killed. But not many presidents would do that. None of them would do that today. That would
nowadays,
be. But did it destroy Reagan? No, Reagan became, not because of it, but in spite of it didn't destroy him. And say, oh, he is so weak. He said he wouldn't turn tail and run, and that's what he did because it didn't make any sense. But no, sometimes we just stay in there until we kill enough people that finally we run out of bombs or something. Yeah.
Well, the whole idea of bombing Iraq and Syria, yet again, on Friday, was to signal strength. We're going to signal strength, and we're going to de-escalate. Well, the proof is in the pudding. To put up this next clip, how did it work out? Did they say, okay, you got us, we gave up, we'll stop attacking you? Well, no, that's not what happened. Here's an AP story from today. At least 6 Kurdish fighters are killed in a drone attack on a Syrian base housing U.S. troops. So not only were they not deterred, they have continued the attacks on these bases because they don't want U.S. bases in Syria. They don't want U.S. bases in Iraq. They want to expel them from their territory. They view them as an occupying power, and a few American bombs do not dissuade them. In fact, I think they encourage them. And here you see it. You're going to continue to see these kind of attacks. But the next article came, I think this dropped yesterday, the Senate, and I didn't have a clip of Senator Mike Lee, but he had put out a good tweet saying, you guys have been working on this in secret for so long, and you didn't tell us, you didn't bring it into us, and then you just dropped it down. Go ahead and put this one. This is from Hedge. Scandalous Senate deal allows 1.5 million illegals per year, slides up to 2.3 billion to NGOs trafficking them, and gives 60 billion to Ukraine. The Senate dropped its long-awaited immigration bill, Dr. Paul, and it is considered DOA. This is Lankford in Oklahoma, and Mitch McConnell's doing.
And they claim that if you don't support them, that you're unpatriotic and not a good American, and you're doing something very, very foolish and wasteful, and you're supporting the enemy. Well, I'll tell you what, I think the problem is not complex. We ought to obey some basic moral principles. We ought to look to the Constitution. We shouldn't fight wars that are never declared, and we should leave. And they say, well, just pick up and leave. My answer is we just picked up and went in. Why can't we just pick up and leave? But they, it's not that easy. If we leave Syria, really leave Syria and not pretend, who's going to get the oil? Well, I'm not sure who's going to get the oil, but I don't think it's if it's worth our while to. We're now the largest producer of oil in the whole world, and here we are occupying Syria, and threatening anybody that will attack us. So it doesn't make any sense. But that's part of history. They have fought over that. I think the only short-term answer is let the locals fight it out. Let them sort it out. But this whole idea that we have this obligation, it's a long trip over there. I don't know which is the furthest, probably Taiwan or Yemen. It's thousands of miles away, and we're determined to go. Where's the front? Well, the front is everywhere. Any place we want to go, that's the front.